It is very, very early in the season, but we're approaching that first international break when we get to really stop and think about how have United started the season. And today we're going to talk about something that is a little bit of a theme for what's happened so far. It's just a little bit of one of those things that at the back of your mind is niggling. It's saying, right, we've been all right so far. There's been moments where United have looked absolutely brilliant, but there's something else. And it's that for some reason, as we approach the second half, we just drop off a little bit. As the game goes on, as we get through and we start to think we're going to get a result here or we're going to kick on, we just don't. And we drop back a little bit. We lose a little bit of that control and a little bit of that game that we've had. So let's have a little bit of a think about why Sheffield United seem to have a bit of a decline after half time. Now, this is a feeling. This was a feeling that I had. I thought, it's been 5 games. Let's have a think. In my head, I'm seeing us drop off after half time. But does that play out? Is that something that's consistent? Is that something that we can say is definitely happening? Well, I went back and I looked at the stats for the games that we've played so far. And against Wrexham, we created 1.2 XG in the first half, 0.3 in the second half, not counting the penalty. Against QPR, we were 2-0 up. We were absolutely cruising our way through the first half. They'd created 0.03 XG in the first half. The second half, they created 0.7, scored 2 goals, and we'd thrown the game away. Against Norwich, we created 0.6 XG in the first half, 0.1 in the second half. Against Barnsley, 0.6 created in the first half, 0.3 created in the second. We'd also only conceded 0.3 in the first half against Barnsley, conceded 1.3 in the second. Clearly, we can see there that the way that games are playing out is that United are generally starting pretty well. Through the first half of games, we're clearly dominant. We're the team that's most likely to kick on and win the game. We are a team that are very good for 45 minutes. When we are playing, we are on it. We have our full fitness. We have our full team together. We are a very good football team, capable of winning games of football. But in the second half, we're losing our intensity. We're getting less creative while other teams are able to create against us. They're getting on top and they're starting to control the game as we drop back and we allow them to push onto us a little bit more. Now, is that a United tactic or is that something that's being done to us? Let's think about the most recent game against Barnsley. We came out straight away from the second half, and from minute 1, they pressed us higher. They started to move themselves up the pitch. They came out with energy and intensity that we just did not match. And they then dominated the first 20 minutes of the second half, which was enough for them to win the game, while we couldn't get ourselves back into it, despite the fact that we ended the game quite strongly based on us, starting to play the first team. But there's a lot of things there that are happening that's repeated across numerous games. So let's think about why would this theme start to be happening. So the first question I'm looking to ask is it fitness? Let's think back to last season, because last season we were massively affected by a huge lack of fitness and a complete tiredness that was really affecting the squad, and it was running through just about every individual. By the time we got to March, we could barely play for 45 minutes, never mind trying to get a full 90 out of them. And it does feel a little bit like that's starting to carry into this year. Despite the new pre-season, despite the fact that we've worked obviously a lot on the squad and trying to get these players together, it's still looking as though after 45 minutes, we just don't have the legs, we don't have the fitness to keep up our intensity, to continue to dominate games, to continue to make other teams answer the questions that we're asking, rather than allowing them to start asking some questions of their own. We do also have a second point that ties into this. So we've asked about the fitness. What about the size of the squad? Because last season, one of the things that was really notable is not just that we couldn't play for 45 minutes, but Wilder made a really big point. He was always saying this in his post-match press conferences, even in some of his pre-match, and it was clearly a message to the board. He was saying that he didn't think he had the squad to be able to consistently contribute. And so he had 11 players. And when that 11 got tired, when that 11 needed to be changed, we needed to make subs, we didn't have any players on the bench who could come on and contribute properly and impact games. Now, from what we've seen so far this season, despite the fantastic recruitment work that we've done in bringing in first team ready players, we still don't have the subs coming off the bench able to change these games. Against QPR made a sub at half time. They then made 2 more subs around the 60th minute. United didn't make any subs at all until the 70th minute when they'd already made 3. The game had already turned to 2-1, and QPR were then starting to really put pressure onto United and starting to look like the only team that were going to score the next goal. By the time that United made their second sub, we were then in the 85th minute. QPR had gone down to 10 men, and our changes were taking off attackers to bring on defenders. So we were then starting to make our mind up that we were sitting in to win this 2-1. When we made our final subs, QPR had already equalised. It was 2-2, and we were then throwing on players in the last minute to try and get back into this game, to try and turn it around. We clearly did not trust the players we got on the bench to be able to impact this game, for us to be able to contribute and see it out. So there's a clear question there about the fitness of the current players who are in our starting 11, whether they can contribute for 90 minutes. There's then the question of, is the squad behind them part of the issue? Now, I'd say, yeah, clearly both of those things are having a big impact. There are issues with early season fitness, and it's so early in the season that you've got to think that gets better. That as they play more games, as they build their match fitness, they get more and more ready to be able to play 90 minutes. So that problem, hopefully, will take care of itself. In terms of our depth, we've got limited time. There's limited work you can do to build your squad depth. And so we either have to put more trust, we have to train the players, we have to do tactics with the players on the training pitch to get more out of them, to get them ready to contribute in our system, to show them exactly what they can do within their own limitations to be able to make these differences, or we have to accept that we've only got 11 players and deal with that. But we'll also start to see that the players will be trained better in the system and will be able to contribute. That's what we should be able to do. But there's one last question that I think needs to be asked. We've talked about fitness and squad. We've talked a lot about the players. This is a question that nobody wants to ask and that none of the fans will want to hear me say. But I think there's an elephant in the room. And I think potentially part of the issue, could it be the 2024 version of 𝗚හි𝗱𝗶𝗲-𝗏? Now, at his best, 𝗚හි𝗱𝗶𝗏 was an absolute revolutionary manager. He is, and probably will forever be, the greatest United manager of my lifetime. He'll also probably be the biggest Sheffield United legend of my lifetime. But 2017, 2018, 2019 is now a long time ago in football terms. In fact, it's a long time ago in all terms. The world has changed since 2019 because of, things that happened. But we are now starting to see a bit of a recurring pattern coming through. There are some familiar issues creeping into United performances that maybe are indicative of where 2024 𝗚හි𝗱𝗶𝗏 is at. Now, one of the things we do need to address is that Chris has created a plan A. And plan A looks brilliant. It looks like it could be very exciting and an unbelievably successful plan A. Plan A, when we used it at its best, tore QPR apart. For 45 minutes, it dominated that game of football and really took them to the cleaners, and it should have been enough to win that game of football. Plan A also just dispatched Preston with absolute ease. We kept them at arm's length, and we made it really easy for us to win that game. And even against Wrexham in the Cup, even the fringe players were trained enough to use that Plan A and to implement it and to use it against a team who should be at the top of League One. So that's 3 good performances where you think, okay, there's enough there to say that Plan A is the right way forward. But now we need to look at, okay, well, what goes wrong? Because against QPR, that plan that had torn them apart then completely fell apart when they pressed onto us, and it ultimately cost us 2 points that we weren't able to pivot away from that. Against Barnsley, it again saw them make a little bit of a change to their system and then dominate us for 20 minutes and cost us another game of football because we weren't able to try and tweak. Against Norwich, it created a really dull second half. It was a point where we couldn't break them down because we're trying to change our style. We're slow in possession. We're trying to pull teams and create that space. But when it doesn't work, we don't have a way. We don't have that individual brilliance that's really able to make a difference. Against a well-coached, a well-organised team, we weren't able to break them down. And so what do we do about that? We need a plan B. What you need to start to think about is, how do we change games? How do we start to look at this? And the best example of this is QPR. I keep talking about this game, but it's the most prevalent example of what we're talking about here. Against them, their manager, Martí Cifuentes, he recognised that what they'd done in the first half just wasn't working at all. He saw that United had completely controlled a midfield battle through Sousa Fuarblasta. He'd noticed that Gilchrist had completely got Dembele so that he wasn't able to break down and create. And he also noticed that what we had got was a little bit of a limitation down our left-hand side in terms of how we were defending and our structure against them. So he made a sub at half-time. He moved Dembele from the right wing over to the left wing to play up against Burrows. He put Cole back in the midfield to give them an extra body, and he told their attackers to press forward. Rather than sitting in and waiting for the ball to go into Sousa and Arblaster, he told them to go forward, press onto Robinson and Anel, so that we weren't having those easy passes and the easy way to come out of our midfield. From that point onwards, we couldn't control the game because it was being played on their terms because they'd forced us back. He did a job on us. That's the best way of describing it, is that he saw what was happening in the first half, reacted to it, and did a job on United in the second half, and it cost us those points, and we weren't able to react to what they'd done and how they'd changed that game. Similarly, against Barnsley, we allowed the game to drift for 30 minutes in the second half when we were losing, and when it was clear that we weren't working. There was only one team that looked like scoring during the first 30 minutes of that second half, and it was Barnsley, and that would have been 2-0, 3-0. They just looked like a team that were ready to get on top of us, take it forward, and all that we could do in that time was, okay, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll put our first team on. We put on Burrows, we put on Harmer, and suddenly we had players who were just a complete class above where we were. And so this is where my concerns come. In 2018, the previous version, the historic, legendary version of Chris Wilder, recognised problems and solved them. Let's look at some examples. Sheffield United can't break down a low block. So what did Wilder do? He invented a completely new system of overlapping centre-backs to make sure that we got a man over, we were still creating overloads, and we could still create chances. Sheffield Wednesday have got all the momentum in this game. They've just scored an equaliser and Hillsborough's bouncing. They're 100% going to go on and win this game. Well, Chris Wilder recognised that actually what had happened is they'd stepped onto us, we'd started to get penned in. We needed more creativity, but also an extra man in attack so that we've got bodies causing them problems. Took off Jake Wright, put on Mark Duffy. The rest is history because they all sat down and never bounced again. And so you can see there that he had this knack of recognising what was going wrong in games, changing it, tweaking it, and driving United forward to get really positive results. Even in some games where it didn't work, Fulham, he did that exact same change, but this time it was Jake Wright off, but he'd recognised a flaw in Fulham's system that they'd got defensive ball-playing centre-backs. He put on James Hansen at that time, and we went from 5-2 to 5-4 in the last 10 minutes. We were really unlucky not to get a point out of that game. He'd recognised a flaw in Fulham's game plan, tweaked United's plan to address it and overcome it, but we're just not seeing that version of him right now. We've not seen that coming through in the early part of this season because when teams have changed and come up against us, he's not been proactive enough to figure that out. And so that's one of the questions that I think we've got to answer here is how do we address the fitness? How do we address the squad? Well, they happen externally. They either come through players developing their fitness, through players getting better in training, or they come through recruitment and we bring in more players to build up the squad underneath them and we sign players who've already got that level of fitness that we want to build upon. But for the manager, he's got to be more proactive. He's got to respond to what's happening on the pitch in front of him. And then hopefully we'll stop seeing this second half slump, which is starting to affect and is probably the key theme of the start of our season so far. Let me know what you think. Have I gone way too early on this? You know, it is so early in the season and it has been a pretty good start from United. We are still unbeaten at this stage, not counting the cup. And so what we've got to try and do is build on that. What we want to do is turn ourselves from a team who are 5 points from 3 games into a team that's getting 7 points from 3 games. Because that's what you've got to do if you want to be promoted out of this division. You want to be getting 2 points a game, up to 2.5 points a game when you're looking at what you've needed in recent seasons to be able to get out of this division. That's what we've got to aim for. That's what we've got to do. And so that's where we've got to make our tweaks to make sure that we are proactive, that we are fit enough, that we are the team who are pressing on in the second half to make sure that we are winning games of football and not just allowing them to drift away from us and teams to come to Bramall Lane and steal our points. Let me know what you think, whether or not I'm being fair, whether or not I've missed some blatantly obvious thing that's going to explain all of it to us and actually means that I've been talking rubbish. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you, as always, for sitting with me and watching this video. I hope you've appreciated it. Let's hope that we can get this right and that we start to see United winning games of football and driving us forward. Up the Blades.